Okay, welcome to the study group that now is called BIM, B-I-M, Body Tensegrity Informed Movement instead of TAT, Tensegrity Assisted Therapy, that came from the course of Leonid and Mariana that we were studying. But we finished, well, we never finished that study, but we are using other sources of information to go on studying what we are studying. Biotensegrity mainly informed and mainly movement. And today we decided to, because Leonid's talk regarding fascia farming, health farming, and artificial intelligence and how it informs and how it helps us to understand what we do as movement practitioners. It was posted on Embodied Biotensegrity, so everyone knows about it, which is very good. And there is a lot of interest. That's why we decided to discuss it again within this group. And that's what we're doing now. So I prepared some phrases that I found important within the talk that for me illustrate the biggest or the most triggering questions and affirmations from Leonid that I can share with you as a conversation starter. But I also would like, in a very selfish way, to have your own reviews and your own views of what came out to you, what your questions were from the viewing of the video. Maybe I can read my phrases first, and if they match your comments, we can add them, or we see where we go from there. If you think it's okay?
Yeah.
Good. And we know that Leonid will join us later. So I'm going to share my thing. It's a very plain word presentation, not fancy one. But here I wrote 5 phrases that I think can illustrate, at least for me, the main ideas from Leonid's presentation. And the first one says, we are born with health farms that develop in utero and increase as we develop. We live on those health farms. And just on this phrase, there's a lot to be discussed, like what is the concept of a health farm? Why health farms? What does this mean? And it was all around in Leonid's talk that he presented this way of expressing his view of health and of how the body functions in health or can function in health. There are these two concepts, these 2 ideas that we develop, these health farms, these resources in utero, and they increase as we develop. But for me, there's the idea, or there can be conveyed the idea that we are born with a set of possibilities in these health farms. We can develop them or decrease them, as Leonid discusses them on the video. But those are a lot of ideas just in this phrase. The second phrase I say, every organ and needs a support base to function properly, and that support is multi-scaled or multi-scaled. Here, the word organ for me was a red light. What does he mean by organ? So Leonid also discusses and conceptualizes what he means by organ. and it means when he talks about an organ, he talks about muscle. A muscle is an organ for him. It's something that gives that has a value function, that gives that serves one function within the body, and it's multi-scale, and the base of support of those organs, of any organ, is multi-scale, that transfers us to the, or directs us to the fascia thing, and the Gamberto's model that he presented in his video. So there's a lot to be unfolded from this phrase for me also. Then another one that I found beautiful, and many people commented already, from the autocracy of muscles in the body versus the democracy of the system of the body. In historical viewpoint, the body was visioned through mainly the muscles, and how the muscles command and work as the masters of the body, of the whole system. And we are viewing the system, the body, in a different way, where every other organ, every other tissue, where fat, intercellular matrix, everything, bones, everything needs to be contemplated in its functioning. So it becomes a real system, a democracy, and not an autocracy. Then for each external event or performance that can be measured in centimeters per second, there is a multitude of events that happen in a much smaller time and space scale, in millimeters per millisecond, micrometers per microsecond, nanometers per nanosecond, etc. So in the external view of something within the body, there is a lot of hidden, unknown in other smaller scales, time and space, smaller scales, that happen simultaneously. So within a second or within a centimeter, there is a lot of time, a lot of motion happening at the same time internally. And last, I wrote, movement practitioners can reach the much smaller scales and facilitate the stacking of tensions until we come closer or at the external expression or performance. And here I think it's one of the main phrases that started this conversation from Leonid, his idea, because he was addressing himself to movement practitioners. How can we, so he proposes a way for us to reach those hidden scales, or a way to explain how we already address those hidden scales without even knowing that we are doing it. And that can be explained using the AI, the computer science, and neural networks, etc., that he speaks about. So these were the main things that called my attention. I don't know, I'm going to stop my sharing. I don't know if anything of these called your attention, if anything of what I said matches your concerns, your doubts, your questions, your comments about his talk, Leonid's talk. And if anyone wants to comment any of these or wants to add any comment to Leonid's talk.
Well, I can say something.
Okay.
Can you hear me right? Okay. One of the things I'm very seduced about the Leonid work and Leonid talks, and I cannot at this time exclude the other talks we have with him from this one. So I'm embedded in all these talks that we're having because he's progressing his language with us. It's this new language that he uses, that he proposes, that makes a lot of sense to me, because so that we can change our way of thinking, we need some new language, some new conceptualization, some new way of thinking, and we need to go past the prior language type. This particular idea of the farming, the fascia farming, the health farming, so even the inclusion of the health word for me makes a lot of sense. But the farming is, for me personally, transports me to nature, to biology, to natural processes, to other way of watching the body than a mechanical way of. I don't know if you agree with me or not, but this issue for me is so important and resonates so much in me, because honestly, sometimes we have some talks about definitions, concepts, which are the best words to define, or which model it's more closer to a gate or whatever. And this conversation starts to be so boring, and it's not even motivated for me, because the description, let's take gait for example. If we are analyzing gait, and normally we are analyzing strike phase, propulsion, suspension, or whatever, I don't feel like I'm not motivated to move. You see, this kind of approach is so unnatural, and this kind of language, new language, the farming, the multi-scale, it motivates me to move. And one of the things I'm very motivated per se in this kind of work, it's to move, it's to help people, it's to search the health of my students and myself. So every time this kind of conversation takes me to that field of needing of motion, that correlates me with something that is more natural, some more unpredictable. The tail approach of this kind of terminology, on this kind of body analysis, it's some more real. It makes a lot of sense. So this is for me the biggest thing. So every issue that you talked here, for me, makes a lot of sense, and I can share with you the idea of the second point that you
Sorry,
talked
Miguel,
about.
can we just
Yeah,
stress a little bit more what you just said now? Because
of course.
I heard you saying that, commenting that. I've been hearing Leonid talking about the need for new maps. And I hear from the beginning in biotensegrity that we need to forget about the anatomy in order to understand what we are trying to talk about. And on the last Embodied Biotensegrity movement talk, I think, last Wednesday, where Graham presented his definition for fascia, I heard Susan saying, and I made a comment on that. I heard Susan talking about, I don't know if that's what you're meaning, Susan, there, but you said we need to restart, to redefine new terms from scratch. We need to start from a blank, which is not a blank page. It's from our experiential, which is what Miguel is saying. We need to use terms that talk to what we live, what we feel. Yeah.
So I agree. And Miguel, I love your example too, because this is an example, this whole gait analysis stuff. It's a great example of, do you guys know the old joke about the person who's drunk and they're looking for their car keys? right? So they're outside and it's late at night and they've come out of the bar and they're looking around. And the officer comes by and says, "What's up, buddy? You know, oh, I'm looking for my keys." And so he says, "Okay, well, where do you think you dropped them?" And he says, "Well, I parked over there. I may have dropped them over there. And then I came into the bar." And the cop says, "Well, why don't you look over where you think you may have dropped them?" And he said, "Because this is where the light is. This is the light post. This is where I can see." So what we're doing is this thing that you're talking about, Miguel, you know, it's what we can measure. So now we're going to put this framework upon something that people have been doing for hundreds of thousands of years. And we're going to put a brand new framework on it based on what we figured out how to measure, which is very macro scale analysis of the event at the output level. And it's you know, it's like, this is nuts. This is a crazy way to do things, but that's how a lot of science works. And I want to say that I learned that joke because on the NIH website, they had this long recording that I heard, I don't know, many years ago. I can't remember what year it was. And they were doing a 10-year anniversary review of this huge grant in systems science. And so it was like a whole weekend of people presenting on systems science at the end of this 10-year period. And this was the opening speech. And the guy who was giving it, Arthur Lander, who's a biology system science guy, was saying, look, we have to remember this joke because we're spending all this time going into all these calculations. It's like we fall in love with our ability to calculate things. And that doesn't mean that that's the important thing that's happening. So, yes. And so the new language, I think I said, you got to throw it all out.
Yeah.
Because all we're doing is we're trying to layer it on. It's like you made a cake, you forgot to use sugar instead of salt. So now you're trying to put on lots of frosting to counteract the fact that you really need to just start again. Sorry.
I agree. But I think I hear another thing there, another maybe a counterpoint, which is we movement practitioners and hands-on practitioners, for years, we have been making up our own language in each technique and each group of practice. And that makes a huge mess. That is because the language we are using is also, it's not understandable within each group.
And it gets extra messy, my friend.
Exactly.
When people try to make it sound like what they're doing is scientific. So then they borrow science words, right? When they're borrowing words from a science that's ill-founded in the first place.
Yeah, I totally
agree. It's really messy.
Yeah. So we have here two problems of, we need our own language coming from our experiential, and that makes sense to what we are trying to study, not overlaying it over the science, the existing sciences or knowledge, scientific knowledge. But at the same time, we also need to come to overcome we call it the shalala language that we use in order to justify what we do without really knowing what we are justifying, because we are picking up from several places that don't really glue together in one whole explanation.
Okay, can I add on?
Please do.
But what we do have, okay, which is wonderful, is we have, you can look on it's free online to read Aristotle's
Mhm.
De Motu Animalium, okay? Because that was the name of Borelli's book in 1670, but Borelli was naming his book. It was something they did in those days after this book that Aristotle wrote. Well, look at Aristotle's. It's very much based on experiential, practical wisdom of what he saw from what was happening. Okay, can find a good translation. And likewise, we have other ancient wisdom, like in the martial arts, for example. And I haven't figured it out yet, but there's got to be one for yoga. Okay, but I think it's gotten thrown out in favor of the more scientific language, you see? And so we have to be really good critical thinkers, but there's okay, in the field of circus work, okay, there's wisdom in that field. This is very often, it gets passed down through families. A lot of circus people are multi-generational, and there's wisdom that gets passed down, because if you don't have that wisdom, you're not going to last. You can't do all these very highly physically demanding shows, okay, and in performance of any kind. So the wisdom is there, but we have to start scratching around for it, digging for it. Then now we can do this, right? We can meet all over the world, many different backgrounds, and we can say, okay, there's a tradition here called this, and this is what they say about movement, the body, exercise, health, fitness, avoiding injury.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And I think Leonid adds well, we have been adding some of these in Biointegrity Talks and somewhere else too, which is the fascia element and the knowledge of fascia within the body.
I have to be off camera, but I'm listening.
Okay, which is wall encompassing. It's there are no divisions, no parts, no layers in the body, because it's a whole multi-scale system that works like that, as a multi-scale system. And the one element that allows that multi-scaling functioning is the knowledge of the fascia as we are knowing it today, I think. And that's why Leonid created the terms health farms, or fascia health farms, and skin maps, and all his new languaging and ways to express how the body can be described and viewed in its functioning. I don't know.
I can go on and on. So, but I don't want to
Please
keep
do.
other people from talking is my problem.
Please do talk.
Okay. Can you show your screen again?
Yes.
Okay. One of, to me, the amazing phrases was AI as anatomical intelligence.
Yeah. So smart.
Okay. That's the intelligence that's inherent to our system. And it is, billions of years, if you will, in the making, right? As long as life has been, and it's happening at these inaccessible scales of knowledge and inaccessible scales of manipulation. And except they're not inaccessible, because that's the kind of, when we work in the cloud idea. We are accessing it, but we're not doing it in that linear, measurable way, because the material it's not conducive to that. And if you look at your okay, your very first statement, we are born with these fascial health farms and other health farms. I think, no, I think you get to it in the next part of the sentence, that we develop in utero. That's what it is. The only reason we're born with them is because we had them at hour 1, and we had them before that. We inherit it, just as we inherit movement. So I can't say too much about it, but Steve and I are getting ready to put out a paper, and people try to talk about movement, and they think, okay, how does the body move? Okay, I'm standing still. How do I get the body to move? And they do this analysis of walking and running and whatever. That's not the question. You are never not moving. Movement is something you inherit. It's part of life. Now, how do you transition and reconfigure so that this kind of movement becomes that kind of movement? That's a different question. You see, so these multi-scales, if you think of an egg, and then you think of, division and division or multiplication, now you've got this many cells, and now you're, and the zygote is growing and growing and growing. Those connections are never gone. And those connections multiply with that cellular division, and then with the with different specializations developing, densifications developing. But the movement was never not there. The connections were never not there. And they're immeasurable, even if it's a single-celled organism. Even you, as a fertilized egg, were not an easily measurable entity. So that's why there are so many. That's also where the error correction and error canceling stuff comes in. Okay. Because that's when he was talking about pi, the number at the end.
Yeah.
And he was saying nature comes in from the right. Nature's not dealing with it from the left. Nature doesn't round up. Nature doesn't approximate and calculate. Because if you go that way, you will break. You would never make it through gestation.
Of course.
Yeah.
Can I ask something?
Yeah, please do. Please, Frida, go.
Measuring. So we, I guess
Leonid is arriving. Okay, go on.
I guess we like to measure stuff, but what you're saying is it that we maybe we don't need to measure, or the way we measure should be something completely different? Because the way we work, for example, with Pilates, it's not the same as like adding weights in the gym, and there it's a lot of like counting and measuring like that. But for me or for us, when we're working, I guess we're measuring on how people feel, if it works or if it doesn't work.
Right. Are they smiling? Are they joyful? Are they more comfortable in their body?
Yeah, and are they more like, are they pain-free the next time you see them, or the next after 10 times, or?
Yeah, so now it's happening from the research perspective, right? I mean, getting people from the world that doesn't measure things, working with more conventional researchers in order to develop that kind of measurement you're talking about, Frida, right?
Yeah.
But do it in the way that will make those scientific measure happy people happy.
Yeah.
There are some things happening in that area right now, because I feel like it's an area of scientific research that is where there's a poverty of this kind of information. So we just need to learn how to box it up. I mean, because we're already bypassing it in terms of our practice and our work. But if we can box it up so that the conversation can happen somewhat in that language that they're comfortable with.
Yeah.
Because that kind of science it's just a different mode of inquiry and a different set of kind of rules and tools, right? But if we can work with somebody in that area that's interested in what we do, wonderful things can happen. That's what Anna Crowell did. If you are unfamiliar with her her papers on pelvic health and biotensegrity, that's how she did them. Yeah. So I agree, Rita.
Yeah. And I think from what I read on from what I heard from Leonid talk, he also proposes, or he also explains in with scientific terms way what we do as body mind practitioners. So we approach those hidden layers by using constraints of time and space, and by stacking the tensions that we gain from so we cascade the tensions in the body in a different way that the hands-on practitioner does it, because we put a little constraint, then we don't just move, we move in a specific way, in a specific order, with specific rhythm, in order to accomplish a specific feeling or sensation that may correspond to a certain what's the name of step of the cascade. So we can address those hidden layers. Leonid explains it with the pair dynamics, with all those scientific approaches.
Yeah, and then that we just have to be careful, right? That we're not that we don't that we are aware of where we have that love of the surefire bet and the linearity, right? Because we're trained in it, right? So if I do this and I have you do this and I have you do this many times exactly this way, your knee pain will go away. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. If I'm too tightly attached to that, now I'm speaking more from my experience teaching Tai Chi and such, right?
I agree with you.
Yeah. I know that in practice that you must, because it's what you do, right? That when we're doing this, we're using all of our experience, which, by the way, is data. Okay, a massage therapist or a ballet teacher or a horseback riding teacher that's been doing this for 30 years has information, has wisdom, and that's built on data, information points. But of course, it's also their personality and all that stuff. But you know what I mean? That's not nothing. That's good, solid, experiential data. But then when we're engaging every individual, I think we would all agree, is a new mystery.
And
right?
and each individual has its own data that can access with awareness,
Yes.
or developing the awareness. That's what we do in our body mind practices, as I think in Tai Chi also, it's gaining awareness of oneself, and what is the space, what is the movement, what is the reaction, what is, like in Feldenkrais awareness, or all those body mind techniques, they appeal to awareness as, for me, the main ingredient to communicate and to check if the cascade is being set in motion or not in one proposed direction or not.
Yeah, but sometimes the results are they come much later too. So it's not always, you know, there's some, I mean, when I'm doing Tai Chi, some of what I'm doing is I'm trusting in that heritage, that wisdom heritage that comes with it, you know, where the evidence may not show up quickly. Martial arts has its own tricky little areas, you know, because of the self-defense piece, you know. So, but yeah, I know, I think we all agree, and this is why these conversations to me are just, they're like gold, you know.
Yeah. As anyone has a comment? Anyone that hasn't? Colby, Celia, Leonid, you're here already, so Colby, you want to comment something on something, or Frida want to add on?
This was a thought that kind of popped back in my head after watching last week's recording with Graham. I forget the terminology he used, but he used compartments. Was that right?
Yeah.
And then he kind of referenced that as it's another word for volumes. And then it made me think back to a talk that Leonid had done for the archive a while back. I don't even remember. I think it was like when the center collapses or something like that, or when the center can't hold. And he had a image of a bicycle wheel, and he was talking about compressive forces being additive versus when you have a tensional system, the tensional system has a way of neutralizing, converting, or subtracting those compressional forces. And it kind of just made sense to me that the the fascia farming, we are cultivating and farming the tissue in the body that is responsible for converting those compressional forces to tensional forces, to neutralize the destructive forces that could cause collapse. I kind of lost my train of thought there, but anyway, I don't know if that resonates with anyone in terms of that imagery.
When I hear you saying getting the compression forces into tensional forces, when I do the use in my practice, how I see it, the use of the folds and working with the folds inside the body, I also envision compression transforms into compression in other areas. So it's not, for me, it's not only compression into tension, but also redirecting redirecting a compression inside the body towards something that can multiply or divide the compression into multiple smaller compressions or forces.
Would you agree that multiplication of compression that you just mentioned requires a membrane, a surface? Like, you can't have the compression without the thing that contains it and converts it into tension. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So if you have more connections, a more vibrant fascial system, what you just said about taking that compression and redirecting it into more smaller compressions requires more tensional aspects, because the tensional aspects surround the compressional aspects.
Of course, when I talk of compression, I talk of tension because the two have to coexist. One doesn't exist without the other, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, I mean,
I
yeah, you see, sorry to, but you see, once again, I still haven't fixed the problem with the video, and it seems to be unfixable. It only escalates. So unless I do something really drastic, because all the other, any video sharing app that I have, the Skypes and everything else, so they don't want to recognize the videos, and the Lenovo stopped the support. So basically, I'm need to do something radical to get the videos back. So I can only do the voice thing. Plus, of course,
you
I
were
can share.
welcome to the voice.
Yeah.
Yes.
Plus, I can share the screen if necessary. Look, so I think that in fact, this question that was raised by Colby is very essential, and I think that that's really what happens, right? Because this mantra, right? So you see this mantra that we hear so much. Well, then tension doesn't exist without compression. Compression doesn't exist without tension. So it's just one level, right? So you see the whole point is that we have we have to look at the sort of second step, right? So you see, like, the compression with the tension flavor and the tension with the compression flavors, right? So you see, we have to add like we have to add the flavors there, right? So you see, meaning what would be the next step of the cascades that is happening there. And the whole point is that what we actually can sort of, I think that that's a big point, is that compressions have a tendency to concentrate. They create concentrations. The compression with the compression flavor, right? So that's this, and that's a standard compression which is actually being assumed and studied in classical mechanics, and that's a standard assumption that exists in the biomechanics itself. So there is an additional nuance, right? So you see what peridynamics does. It takes compression creates cracks, but cracks in turn could be seen as a form of tension. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
So because, as the cracks spread, they have a certain rate. They are not immediate, right? See, as the crack, you can imagine as you, or even...
Yes. That the cracking is a release of tension.
Well, I'm just saying, cracking has to be seen as a process in itself, right?
Yes.
So you see, which is more tensional in nature, even though it's kind of I mean, that's it. It's generated by compression, but that's the important part. Like the cracks, they have never been considered as something of value in that sense, right? So you see, that's what the interesting part about the peridynamics, that it takes the next level, that takes the cracks and makes sense out of them over a certain area and so on. So, and that's where because if you take the compression as compression in two forms, right? So you see, compression can go into crystal with even further concentrations, right? So you see, imagine you're compressing the diamond, right? So then you actually have a compression which just kind of gets through it. It doesn't, it's a crystal structure which is able to store a lot, and it doesn't have any cracks. Yes, because it's a crystal, it's a crystal lattice. Or, if the links are weaker, then the compression, the concentrations in that sense, right? So the concentrations translate into the cracks. And then the same thing, right? So you see, the cracks could also come from the sources of, from the tension sources and so on. So that's, I think that the more important distinction, instead of being stuck to tension and compression, right, is to add this other aspect, which is about the concentrations and distributions. So,
okay, can I jump in on this?
Please do.
So this, we see cracking as breaking, right? I'm not going over that bridge. Look at that crack in that beam, right? It's breaking. It's not good.
In the engineered structures, they are, of course.
Correct, because they're dealing with a different kind of material. And what we need to be able to learn is that there's a kind of cracking that's beneficial.
Well, but in fact, I would go more radical than that. You know,
Okay.
my radical statement would be is that actually life exists in the life is a continuous process of cracks, right? So you see, it's basically the order and whatever, or kind of post order or whatever. So the what looks as permanence or what looks as kind of a structure which is created out of the cracks.
Yes.
So
Yes.
and
Okay.
in that sense, you see, that's what I was mentioning before, right? Is that, you know, we had those conversations about Gumberto's videos, yes? So you
Yes.
see, like and those conversations were, you know, like going in two levels. You see conversations with Steve. So the point one was, okay, it's great that we have those Gumberto videos, which are showing us some kind of endoscopic images, and they educate the people on what happens underneath. So that's great, right? So you see, and they educate the people on the fact that it's not hard, and that is actually, it's a soft, this kind of like the snot type of, you know, reference to cartilage and so on from Steve, right?
Yeah.
But right, so you see, his second reference has always been, but we have to remember that images, they are not true in the way that he introduces the extra force into it. The endoscope, you know, let's say the pole or the tip of the endoscope itself forcefully spreads the tissues. So therefore, those particular lines which are being formed, so they are kind of artificial in that sense, more artificial than what actually happens in real life if you were just kind of, I don't know, observing them as a participant, I don't know, or like if you're just looking at those through ultrasound or some non-invasive technique. But I would actually, upon like a lot of pondering and some further considerations, I would take the third stance and say, yes, it's not true, right? It's not natural in that sense, but actually it's by introducing this additional kind of charge, an additional spread, an additional, you know, force, he actually outlines the hidden nature of the cracking that is otherwise blurred in their what would be their say regular observations without the, you know, without the invasion. So I would actually give the credit for this to be more informative than if we were observing the undisturbed tissue kind of as a third level of the argument, because it actually shows us, you know, we can see it as time as a time lapse, as a sort of speed up of the, as if you just speed up the clocks, right? You see my point? So
but also, but Leon, it allows us to see the organism's potential for reconfiguration.
exactly. But you see what I was saying, right? Is that he introduces the force, right? By introducing the force, he actually does the same effect as speeding up the clock. Effectively, that force introduction being the time lapse equivalent. So these are the things which are actually happening in real organism, but on a different time scale. So hence, if we're observing it in our, you know, because, you know, the question is that if we're observing it in the ultrasound, why don't we see it? Well, we don't see it because we look at the ultrasound through our current time scale, through our current clock. But that's the point, that at the level of those tensions and those macro, you know, let's say complex things, the clocks and the machines, they become, you know, because you see, this is important to remember, you know, every machine is a clock and every clock is a machine. So that's an important thing, right? And that what happens is, right, so you see, it just you know happens that when it comes to life, it's much more about the clocks with a certain kind of machine residue, whilst when it comes to the engineering, it's much more of the machine with a certain clock residue, right? So, and that's, you see, once again, I get this, I keep getting to Van der Waals images and his interpretation of what he calls polarity, right? So you see, the essential thing here is that if we have a system that is kind of continuous in time, that means that it doesn't have a true zero, right? So you see, and every calculations, every computation zone, it requires a zero. So, the range from 0 to X, or from 0 to 1. The big point is, even though he doesn't formulate it mathematically, his point is that there is, and we're getting back to what, the conversations with Steve about the fact that because of there's a pre-stress, it never goes to zero, right? So that's the essential thing. It never goes to zero. There is no true zeros. So, and once there are no true zeros, that's the true holism is only possible when there are no true zeros. So you see, and listen, to his descriptions, right? So you see, he takes
That's
those.
your thing with Leonid. That's your thing with pi.
No, I mean, I would put it even simpler, right? So you see,
But
again,
it's related. No,
it
to
is
me,
related, but his images are very easy to follow, in fact, right? So you see, he basically goes, okay, so what is a sperm cell, right? A sperm cell is the minimum, right? So you see, the cell which embodies the maximum property, where the slider goes to the maximum one way and to the minimum the other way, right? So you see, it contains as little cytoplasm as you can have. So that would be the zero equivalent, right? Because you can't, run the cytoplasm to zero, because then it would be dead, right? So the same way he talks about the brain, right? So about the neurons. So you can't run it, this is the minimum that you can have and still be, the entity. So, but at the same time, in proportion to this smallest amount of the cytoplasm, it has the greatest, the largest proportion of the nucleus, right? And in the same time, it has the greatest ratio of the membrane to cytoplasm, right? So on the other hand, you have the egg cell, which is the one which is on the opposite side of the spectrum, where it has the maximum cytoplasm, right? That would be the equivalent of 1, right? So you see, if we talk about the typical range from 0 to 1, what is a 0? 0 is the minimal amount of cytoplasm when the membrane still doesn't collapse, right? And 1 is a maximum amount of cytoplasm where the membrane still doesn't burst. So the same thing, right? So you see, when we discuss those things, tensions, compressions, and so on, right? So you see, this is the important thing to consider, that, it doesn't run to zero. So, and this is in general a mechanism, like a way to think that when we get to the clock and the machine, right? So you see, therefore, every machine is a clock because it's supposed to last more than an instant. Yes. It has, it has tacts, it has, it generates events. The machine has to generate more than one event, and machine has to generate, it's about fundamentally, machine generates a certain cycle. So as long as it generates a cycle, it's a clock. But on the other hand, right, so you see, so therefore an engine, so what is a bridge, what is a construction, right? So you see, what is a truly compressional structure? A truly compressional structure is the one that is timeless, right? So you see, it's one event, and then every other events are destructive for it. So it's a timelessness. It's as little, the time is it's the clock which is as slow as it could possibly be. And what enables that super slow clock, right? What enables those super slow clock is a direct transfer of forces from the meter second type of the interactions which exists in the kind of real world, right? To immediate bypass, to immediate bypass to the micro, micrometers, microseconds, right? So you see bypassing the millimeters and the milliseconds type of thing. So that's what enables it. So it's a timelessness in that sense. And on the other hand, we have the next mix. So a machine, which is, I don't know, any machine that does something, right? So you see this machine already runs the cycles, right? So you see this machine already delivers a certain clock, and it has, it handles certain errors in it as it goes. And then we move and move and move and move and move towards the clocks, right? So you see the clocks, as we know them, they become the special machines which are, capable of running at certain intervals, right? And they don't do a particular work externally other than kind of which, the one that is not interfering with their, cycles, right? And then as we go further, right? So you see, as we go further, we continue this line, right? So in that sense, what is a computer? Computers are cleanest, they're clean forms of clocks, right? So they're more clocks than being the machines. And then as we go further and we kind of start discussing the next level, what would be the thing with life, right? So you see, that would be even next level of combining the clocks, and even more so the way that what I see is a radical thing about life, right? As a principle, is the capacity to actually convert the cracks into, it's something which can run, on the crack clocks, right? So the cracks become the source of the clocks. And as imagine you made something out of the overlap of zippers. As it unzips, this one unzips, as this one unzips here, it gets zipped to something else, right? So you see, and then it's unzipping there. So you see zippers, a zipper is a clock. That's clear, right? That the zipper is a clock. It has click, 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 right? It could be irregular if it gets stuck, right? So you see, it could be whatever, but the zipper, imagine an infinitely long zipper. An infinitely, like a very, very, very long zipper. What would it be? This is the first, what is a principle, the primary principle of the computer? An infinitely long zipper. It's just described as a tape in the computer language, not as a zipper, but it is a zipper. And what is a stacking of algorithms? You move from, you basically decide, okay, so this zipper clicks until that, then we stop this zipper, then we switch, then when we start the other zipper, whilst that first zipper kind of reconnects and re-enables and so on. So that's why organism is a continuously falling apart, right? At all the scales, it's continuously falling apart, but at the same time having the capacity from falling apart, having a capacity to reassemble. And completing this story, right? So you see, getting back to tensegrity and, to Fuller there. So, when we talk about the van der Waals examples, the egg cell versus the sperm cell, the egg cell being the maximum amount of cytoplasm that is still possible, compatible with life, right? So you see, and then the sperm cell being the minimal amount of cytoplasm and the relatively maximum membrane. So what does it remind you? It reminds you, of course, of the Fuller, right? So you see where at the where he puts as a primary kind of duality at the base of his system, he puts the tetrahedron, which is a sperm cell, right? Meaning minimum volume within this particular surface area, yes? And that's a sphere, which is the largest volume within that particular surface. And of course, if you start looking from the surface perspective, that's the other way around, right? So if you start looking from the perspective of the surface, then you say, okay, so what is the minimal possible surface for the existence, which you carry as the volume, or what is a maximum volume that you can carry within a fixed surface, right? So that's kind of this, you get the duality, then this duality flips into, if you look, because if you look from the outside, yes, so you're only dealing with this, with the surface. If you're looking from the inside, then you have the inner volume. So, and that is really this kind of combination of things which you start seeing, but actually the whole conversation started with the tension and compression. So from a practical standpoint, I would be emphasizing the fact that yes, the essential part of the organisms is that it converts external compressions into internal tension distributed, because in tension, because compression in a typical kind of, in a standard classic mechanics, compression is bound with increasing concentrations, whilst the tension is bound with is more like the source of the distribution. But as I said, the important note there is that we need to include the cracks as a creative process, right? So you see, and that's the thing which is impossible, right? That's where the thing limits within the classic mechanics, right? The classical mechanics, considers the cracks and everything that, and everything that has to do with irregularities goes as problems, right? So you see, this is something that, hey, they have to, they're trying to, like, first conceptually they are excluded, and they are being then, like, included on a case-by-case basis. So fundamentally, and I see your point as well, right? So you see, your point was, if I'm looking at the way experientially how the person explores the fold, right? So you see, I know, like, putting it simply, you are bending your elbow, right? So if you're bending your elbow, so now you're looking at what's happening on the inner surface of the elbow. Now, if we put, if we use Steve's earlier kind of show-ups, what he would say, he was able to crack the walnut by his strong biceps, right? So you see, he was cracking walnuts by bending arms, right? Whilst bending his arm. What is that? That's, of course, a compression, right?
Mhm.
But why does walnut, but what actually happens to the walnut so that it's eventually explodes, right? It's a, first there are concentrations, but then those concentrations, they spread as cracks, and then the thing kind of explodes. So that's a, but in those kind of hard objects, if you wish, there is this lag of the accumulation which goes between, the application of compressive forces, sort of stacking of those in the current, thing, and then eventually when it builds up excessively, then the micro cracks collectively, give the rise to the meso and the macro cracks. But fundamentally, it's a conversion to cracks. So therefore, and this is what I was trying to share, I know, maybe more than a year ago, when I was, when I did that piece about the linkage folding algorithms. So that effectively what you are having is that the cracks and so on and so on. So you have to be seeing them as their linkage folding algorithms, so that those, how the larger scale of folds that you experience at the level of the skin, how they then cascade internally into the, mesoscale, and in our kind of more current language, it would be from meter seconds, converting into the millimeter, millisecond, milliplaces, right? So that would be this. We can also, if we are looking for the words, we can even call it the, I don't know, depending, we can call it the nanofication, right? So
nanofication.
Yeah, because you see, if you think,
You're going
about,
from the macro to the micro.
Yeah,
But-
yeah. Well, I mean, you see, but my point here is actually it's a bit nuanced, right? Because when these guys, they always talk about the nanoscale, right? So you see that nanoscale, engineering and all this kind of genetic engineering and all this kind of crap, right? So, but the thing is that if you are looking at the transition from meter-seconds and countable units to millimeters, milliseconds, and actually thousands of areas, right? So you see, that means that you've got milli. Yes? So if you mill it by milli becomes nano. Yes? So therefore, in fact, we are talking that this creates a nanofication. Or if we want to understand it in a flip version, right? So you see, that would be a gigazation, but gigazation doesn't sound as good as the nanofication. So the true,
Okay.
yes. So the
I just
true
wanna-
nanoscale is at the millimeters and milliseconds.
So I just want to go back to, I put a link in the chat. What Colby was talking about with the compression and tension. One way I word it, we're talked about before you came on, Leonid, that we're always trying to find new language, because it's like, in order to get any kind of, I don't know, forward momentum and accuracy, is I think of it as organisms living things as a tension governed systems more than compression governed systems.
Yes,
One
absolutely.
way I'm looking at it, okay? And the the top, and Daniel Claude talks about it being a tenso-compressional system, right? So instead of choosing tension, compression, it's a tenso-compressional system. It's a system and it's a process. And you talked about that in your talk, Leonid, about how it's a process. And the thing I put in the chat is Michael Turvey, and he's talking about the multifractality of the system. And that's another way of talking about this. Or when we build a tensegrity, and Graham's built them, Gerald has built them, where the bars and the cables are all made of tensegrity masts or staffs, or however you want to put it. And so you can begin to imagine how, when you push here, or you pull, it doesn't have to be a push, it doesn't have to be a compression, right? It can be a tension. Somebody pulls on your arm, right?
Exactly. But you see, just let me interrupt you for a second.
That force, that external force coming in, can get distributed through the system, not only at one scale level, but we're cultivating the ability, when we're doing our fascial farming, right, to do it, to improve our ability to take those perturbations and distribute them at as many scale levels as we want, or as we can. There's only so much we can have conscious control over, and we don't want to distribute it fully, right? Because if I fall off of the roof, I don't want that perturbation. I want it distributed when I hit the ground, but I don't want it distributed to the part that it's going to interfere with the functioning of my heart or my liver or my kidneys. Okay. So
can I, sorry, thank you, Leonid, I'm sorry.
Yes.
It's past 7 and it was supposed to finish at 7. It's okay. It's past 1 hour. It's okay. But I just think that Frida, Colby, or Celia, or Miguel, because you, Leonid, you wanted to hear the feedback
Yes.
from people that
Yeah,
consume this
absolutely.
information.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you, Frida, Colby, Celia, or Miguel, you want to say something, give a feedback of what you heard at the original talk from Leonid, what you got from it, what called your attention, what rang a bell, what was important for you, what stood besides all this conversation that Susan and Leonid are having. What stood from the conversation, from the talk of Leonid?
If I can I go ahead?
Yes.
So I think it was really brilliant how, speaking of language, like to find a new language for some things, it was all like coming together so nicely with all the images of agriculture and the fascial farming and all of that. So I think it was really nice. And somehow, even though I know that there are so many levels of this that I don't get, somehow it still really made sense. So I feel like there's so much there to translate into what we're doing in the studio every day. And I guess that's what I'm trying to sort out a little bit. And I was, first of all, some of the terms, because it is new terms, I'm not quite sure I get everything with the cascades and with the stacking tension and the fascial farms and all of that. It is still, again, it does make sense somehow, but yet, of course, there are so many layers of it. But you were saying something about that to go from accidental health farm feeders, I don't know if I'm quoting exactly correctly, but to systematic health farm enablers or discoverers.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, something I'm like, yes, please, but how? Like, what these health farms that Nuno was also mentioning, that it's sort of something that comes with development or even is inherited, like Susan was talking about. But can you map that and say, like, yeah, it's this and this and that? Because you were mentioning an example with the baby's foot and the what's it called, interosseous membrane, and also there was an example, I believe, about in the spinous processes. So yeah, my question,
can I say
yeah.
something there, Frida? Because and I'm sorry, Leonid, because we will have a talk between practitioners that really don't understand all the concepts that you talked about. And when I hear Frida saying that, and by hearing your talk, I also heard that you are telling us, movement practitioners, in these body mind practices, that actually what we are doing without knowing that we are doing, so we do it accidentally, but we can do it consciously. What we are doing, it's actually we are accessing the health farms, the multi-scale health farms that we have, by constraining time and space, or time or space, within our practices, and using awareness on top of it.
Yeah, but so my question is, like, how do we go from then the accidental to more systematic and like more aware of how we're doing that? Is that like a clear map? And then the like stacking of tension is more in the moment and more individual, but is the fascial farms more the same in all human bodies?
Okay, this is a good question. You know, so I'm very happy to hear that. So, you know, again, of course, it goes, it sort of extends. But you see, look, there are 2 points there. So, at least, what I was using, there are, you see, fundamentally, we have to divide there sort of the processes and the areas, because, you know, if we have a kind of sort of triangulate the guidance, yes, so the guidance has the guidance about the areas where you are, right? So the guidance has the thing about their, you know, their intentions, so with what you formulate, kind of your I would say the intentions being formulated, not just it's a kind of what and when component, right? So you see, because when you say, okay, I want to achieve this, I get this kind of visuals, right, in terms of the process. And, you know, the standard things would be, okay, I want to get a release, or I want to improve the mobility, right? So you see, in that sense, you sort of travel in time and set the outcome goals there, right? And then you have there in the moment process, which is your natural clock of the interaction with the body. So these are the 3 things, right? So now what I'm saying is that as a practitioner, you are the people with the clocks, you know, with the real time. So technically speaking, with the proper clocks that are so strong that those proper clocks, which are very well tuned in you, they overrun the very distorted and very inhuman, very, you know, let's say, inalive and so on, guidance in kind of astronomical time, which goes in terms of the division of the body into the anatomical areas and their understanding of the cascade of processes that should happen. So in that sense, so that's why that's what I call accidental versus systematic. So currently you are using your internal, the strength of your kind of the clicks of your clock, which goes at the connection to the other body and the other person, to overrun the crappy images that you've been given through engineering and the anatomy and the crappy mapping. So
certainly, when you say the clocks and the clicks, you say the sensations.
Yes,
and the
of course. So you
perception.
see,
Okay.
you know, the decisions that you're making, where are you going to move next? So you connected to the person, right? You know, it could be a physical connection if you're a body worker, right? So you see, it could be a guide, and it could be kind of an in-between if you are, you know, a practitioner who guide the person to a certain position, or it could be just kind of deep, even a sort of distant link of a coach and the kind of the dual awareness, right? So you see, when you're synchronizing your awareness with the awareness of the person, you know, teaching them their particular movement, right? So this is what you're doing as those clock settings, whilst what we have as the anatomical maps, they are prosthetic maps. They're not real life maps, right? So these are prosthetic maps. What we have as the descriptions, even those tensions, compressions, and so on. So these are, you know, these are chopped of the realities. So therefore, that's why it's accidental. Means that your maps are wrong, but your, you know, and that's your astronomical clocks are wrong, but your proper inner clocks on the interaction, they are right. So therefore, and this is where you are set in this continuous conflict, right? So you see, when, you know, that you are connecting to a person, but you're struggling for the explanation, you're struggling for the guidance, you're struggling for the directions, and so on, in that sense. So, and what you also see is that the biomechanics, or the people who are more academic, right? So you see, they're exactly the opposite. So the academic people, they are the ones who take, you know, the base of their reality are the astronomical clocks and the maps that they get through the anatomy, and then they would actually, you know, like twist and switch off any sensations, in other words, any proper clocks, right? The proper time, the proper clocks, you know, like processual clocks, right? So the proper clock, the proper time is a natural time of the process. Whilst astronomical clocks, these are the external clocks which are kind of, you know, associated with the, you know, which are separated from the process, right? So
And that's why you say that we, as body mind practitioners, we can slow the clocks, the astronomic clocks, into smaller or into slower clocks that can be properly fit into the
that's
proper
the
cascade of the person. Yeah.
that's one line, right? So you see kind of from fast clocks to slower clocks. And the second thing is, of course, you know, go with the more natural mapping. So, and that mapping, where can we learn this mapping, right? So you see this mapping we can learn through the process of the, you know, like of the early, more early developmental stages. So that's why what I was kind of giving as an examples are those when you look at the early developmental stages, you can discover that, oh, by the way, you know, when you try to scale back from seeing, oh, wow, this is a giant calf and these are the tiny toes, and try to interpret them, you know, via, oh, this is the body made for standing, right? So you see whatever James Earl's type of style, right? So you see made for walking, or all the, or born to walk, this kind of stuff, right? So you see, then you actually fit what you see into this preconceived notion, you know, and you say, okay, it's whatever happened before, it's basically just prepares us for this particular status, which has this functional role, blah 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 blah, right? And that's why you see, look at this, how powerful is the calf, and so on, and then you get all these jumps and so on. And then, you know, like also you get the arguments, okay, but if the person, for example, accidentally breaks the toe or loses the toe, nothing wrong particularly happens to them, and you know, and you can have all this type of the conversations. But the fact, but what we can do, we can actually come with a different mapping of the same living beings and say, okay, if we look at it processually, you know, what happens, what are the primary prior states which are necessary to then actually control this particular power unit, right? So we need to get everything around it, right? So that's, and these are the examples which I was giving as a regional interpretations. So you've got the regional interpretation. So this is where I'm talking about, I know, like most spectacular, maybe, I know, 30, 40, 50 maps that I just managed to discover by observing the endless number of the children with disabilities and studying the early phases, right? So it's saying, hey guys, if you follow those maps are much more in line with what you're doing, with your clocks of the direct perception of the person. So that's regional aspect. And the other thing is the conceptual part, right? So the conceptual part, the what thing, what do you want to achieve? And that's why, you know, this is where we want to bring those ideas as whatever cracks and so on. But recently, I was actually thinking about it in an even more kind of simple way. Because you see, effectively, if we are moving one level back and saying, okay, when, like, what has happened in the big science at the kind of 100+ years ago edge? We have the, you know, on the one hand, of course, we have the theory of relativity, and then we have the quantum mechanics. But quantum mechanics, what preceded it? Statistical mechanics, right? So the stat mechanics and the statistical thermodynamics means that you look at clouds and processes, not at units. And what is the central problem of anatomy? Anatomy lives under the assumption that you can figure out units, name them, label, and then make something meaningful out of units. So, and therefore, if we start looking from the stat mechanic point, it's actually super simple. Everything that we know as the external action, these are the elements which deliver the heating function, right? So the cuff is a major source, the cuff itself is a major source of heat, right? It elevates it. Action is heat. But in order to be able to deliver and control the heat, what do you know? What do you need? You need the cooling system, yes?
Mhm.
So therefore, during the embryo phase, during the earlier phase, it's the installation of the cooling systems which then later enable a certain capacity for the heating systems which are responsible for our performance in the outer world at meter seconds. So in fact,
Which are those cooling systems that you're talking about?
health farms are cooling systems.
Okay.
This example which I gave about the activity of the toes, the toes extensors, then the peroneus and the
Mhm.
tibialis anterior, and how they feed the interosseous membrane. So these are all the cooling systems which allow to handle the spikes of the heat generated by the let's say the gastrocnemius as the action generator.
Okay.
So this is in fact even a simpler image, right? So if we look at and what is being defined, the other language that we can use for this, everything that makes things, the processes of the internal easification, that's the processes of the health farms. These are the processes of cooling things down. This is the processes of the distribution versus the concentration. So it's about the same. It's the different languages, different aspects of the same thing. From thermodynamic perspective, it's cooling down. From the mechanical perspective, it's distribution. How does distribution work? The distribution work at the transition from large scale meter second scale to the millimeter, millisecond, milliplaces scale. So that's really the thing. And what we are facing, if you look at the big picture, the evolution effectively is about the development of those cooling systems. So it's a massive cooling systems which generated very little of the external activity, in terms of the function, in very little heat, right? And what has been this development of the civilization? Extracting more and more and more work out of those natural reserves of cooling which we've developed through the evolution.
Mhm.
And why do you see, for example, massive problems today with the children, right? So you see that today's children, you don't have average children anymore. Children are spread in fractions. If you talk about their development, of their activities, they're either hypo or hyper. If you talk about their feeding behaviors, they're either eating too much or too little, right? So they're very selective or they're non-selective at all, right? So you see, and then the same thing. So basically, what happens is that current modernity heats people up through the mechanism of attention, through the demand for greater action, through taking away the idle time and so on. And the fact is, what happens? We see the insufficient heat generation, insufficient process, insufficient work. We see it as a problem. We see it as a limited function and so on. So whilst in fact, you have to see it the other way around. The organism doesn't have enough of the cooling capacity to afford larger external function. So instead of trying to beat the organism and get more out of it, so what is our message? Hey guys, let's check the cooling systems improve them, deepen them, and so on. And that is going to open naturally for you the opportunities for, you know, the external functions.
Yeah, and you're also trying to say that we are already doing that, and but we don't know that we are doing that.
Exactly.
We are
So
not doing that systematically or
because
consciously.
you still think that you are doing some heat up.
Yeah, because our maps are completely different than the
Of
maps
course,
that we
because the
should
only
be
maps
doing.
that exist, these are the maps for heating up and for doing the external work and whatever, you know,
Yeah.
for the and the maps for the functional prosthetics. But in fact, what we have is this, right? Is that in fact you are already the people who are working in the as coolers, not heaters. But
Yeah.
you sell it to yourself and you sell it to the customers because it's a social pressure, because the only language that exists is the language, okay, am I going to be able to generate more function, as I'm able to be able to generate more heat after your work? And you're saying, okay, my experience shows, yes, you will be able to do it more through this kind of work, which doesn't, you know, beats you as a circle horse, right? You know, doesn't kind of tries to squeeze more out of you immediately. We're going to do this gentle, soft, whatever work and so on. And that's going to enable your function in a different way. But in reality, you are actually feeding the cooling systems, creating more of the cooling capacity. So therefore, the person becomes more ecological in their external heat production.
Yeah, and that also hinders us for, or makes it more difficult for us to sell our work, because we are saying that we sell something. People are expecting to perform,
Yes,
and that's what we do. And we have to tell them and convince them, hey, stay with me for longer, because this needs to be longer and it needs to be softer, and you don't need to sweat exactly. So it generates a talk that sometimes is difficult to sell
of
or
course,
to
because, you
explain
know,
what we are
then
doing.
comes a person who says, you know, look, you know, you have to work hard, you know, let's say, you know, eat some stimulators, get, you
Yeah,
know, you just have to do the right kind of hard things. So you haven't been working enough or whatever. So you see, like, you are not a, you know, you are not a wimp. So do more, you know, just work harder, go over the, you know, go over the bump, and you will, you know, you will prevail. So
yeah,
this type of conversation is dominating, right? The you know, dominating, competitive, and so on, everything that goes in this dimension. So, and that's why, of course, you are ending up in a weak position. So you are trying to sell the heat up function, but saying, okay, the slow heat and and, you know, like, this nice slow heat is actually better than the very big heat, so and so on. And some people who are so overburned already, they listen to you and say, okay, I'm happy with this. But in fact, it's about cooling. And one thing that I wanted to say, actually, before getting any further, right, is that, you know, because Susan referred to the word fractals, right? And we all use the word fractals. I have been using the word fractals for how many years, you know, and I don't know, like at least 15 more since I've kind of really bumped into Mandelbrot. But what is fractals? Fractional. What is fractional? It's about cracks, right? Fractals are about cracks.
okay.
So so therefore fractals is actually literally talking about cracks. But the thing is that cracks and engineering, they're so incompatible that even the word which is literally saying cracks, what are fractions? Fractions are cracks, partials, right? So it's cracking the numbers, right? You know, fractions are cracking the numbers, the cracks at numbers. So, but the cracks are so unnatural for the engineering and so useless that even the word became the word, but the actual meaning, the direct meaning that fractals are actually cracks is lost. And, you know, it
Yeah.
took me an accidental morning thought, like, like, oh, fractals? Because I was like talking fractals and cracks separately. I said, Mr. Bloom, you know, like you are like fractals are cracks, you know, let's say basically he talks about roughness, you know, roughness is the presence of the cracks, you know, and then wow, you know, actually Mandelbrot has been talking about it. So when we talk that life is fractal, we actually literally mean that life is running on cracks.
Yeah.
Cascades of those cracks, right? So, but Frida, that was very, very nice. So sorry to, you know, but, you know, I hope that this is helpful, what I said,
Yeah,
but
very helpful. Thank you very much.
so, but, you know, like
Very.
this is exactly the questions that I'm like, because, but you see, this is what we're doing, right? Is that, you know, we had this conversation before, and, you know, the conversation in the Byte Integrity, you know, group is that this is, and that's one of the kind of things that I tried to bring sort of later, is that what we all, where we all coming from, in, let's say, at least Byte Integrity group, right, is that from the part that we're trying to, we basically look at the current presentation, which the biomechanics as a kind of the engine behind the way that structures and life and so on is made. So what they give, and we say, guys, you are kind of primitivizing it way too much. So basically, we're starting to add details to their story and saying, hey, you are missing the point here. You're missing this. So you see, if we zoom in, there's going to be much more there. So the way that you round things up is actually inaccurate. You can't round up like this. That's what we've been trying to say and trying to bring this message to them. But this is where we face this fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is that when we address this message for the people who potentially have the intellectual capacity and the reserves of knowledge to understand it, they are completely disinterested in this.
Mhm.
And because that goes against their established interests. It's like, you know, basically, you know, telling them some kind of face palm, guys, you know, let's say this was under your feet, and with all of your professional capacities, you know, we the outsiders, you know, notice this kind of problem. So what is their reaction? Their reaction is like, you know, who the hell are you? You know, you have no, you know, show me your credentials, you know, and publications in our distinguished journals before you are even allowed to do this kind of critique. So they, but the problem is that for those for whom this kind of message makes sense, once we get it into this more sophisticated, more advanced engineering language, they lose it. They don't have the competence, they don't have the, you know, the intellectual background and the sufficient knowledge and confidence to know whether it's true or not. So, and the conversation about and that's what we're kind of trying to find, is trying to find the language, you know, at least the first and second level kind of packing, which is going to be, okay, it's illustrative enough that it shows, okay, that's one way and that's another way, right? And so that's the whole idea of the health farms has been very much trying to find this language, so that, and trying to something executive there, so that we can at least have this first level of communication for the people for whom it's really meant and really like practical and useful, that they would not be scared of, oh, you know, this is just a technical conversation. I'm not equipped into this, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the thing.
Okay, Leonid, I'm sorry, but I have to close the meeting now, because it's more than half an hour after what we said. Is it okay? Are you okay with that?
Who? Me?
You, Leonid. Yeah.
I'm a visitor here, right? So you see, you had the
Okay,
meeting.
good.
you invited me to the meeting, so you see,
You're very, very welcome always.
still,
I know others may have things still to say. Susan, you have something to add on?
I
Something
just
quick?
wanted to say thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think no, I'm sure we'll go on with the conversation. Maybe next month in our meeting, we'll pick up some of these issues and we'll go on with them. And if Leonid wants to join, please do. We'll be glad. Okay.
so which elongates the meetings and kind of, I don't know, maybe, I don't know whether it makes them more productive, but okay,
We love
so,
it.
It's all
okay,
good.
so, yes, thank you so much.
Thank
So,
you very
and
much for coming, and we'll see you soon.
yeah, we'll see you soon. Cheers, guys.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Guys and gals,
Thank
you know,
you.
like, yes, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.